Hey everyone, it's Selwen here with some Warlock goodness, starting with the Cheesemeister and Master of Dots and the Antorus raid, the Affliction Warlock. So let's get straight into it, shall we? So the first spell in our dot arsenal is Agony, dealing damage over time for 18 seconds, hence the abbreviation DOT. And as it deals damage, it ramps up in stacks, up to 10 times. Soul Shards, along with mana, are your two resources. The shards are primarily used to summon your variety of demonic pets, and for your most powerful spell, Unstable Affliction, a very strong dot ability, damaging in a short duration of 6 seconds or so, but hitting much harder and faster than any of your other dots, and with a small cast time, however. The weakest of your dots is Corruption, simply doing damage for 14 seconds. Your main filler to use between all of that is Drain Soul, a channel ability, damaging as you, channel, and healing you at the same time. Plus, if the target dies with it active, generates a soul shard. Your main AoE is Seed of Corruption, planting it on one target, exploding after it dies or after it receives a certain amount of damage, spreading corruption to all nearby targets as it explodes. Your main cooldowns is Summon Doomguard or Infernal, a very powerful pet, but they will be gone in your talent choices, so yeah. And your artifact ability is Reap Souls. As targets die or when you deal damage, small purple orbs will pop up that will be able to consume with this ability. More souls consumed, the more it will last for up to 1 minute, increasing your damage by 10% and doubling your artifact rate effects. More on that later. Life Tap will be your way to avoid going out of mana, since like I said, it's actually a resource here and using your spells will spend it, and to replenish it will be with this ability at the expense of HP. And your Mastery, Potent Affliction, simply increases your dot ability's damage. So in your talents there aren't any crazy builds, just some choices here or there depending on the encounter and the situation that you're gonna be in. So let's go talk about what talents you're usually gonna pick in various scenarios. So in the first tier, Malefic Grasp will be best by increasing your dot damage every time you channel Drain Soul. Now this can be potentially great for fights that are pure single target with little movement, or you can work your way out of it easily, because to make it work properly, you're gonna need to have long periods of time that you're gonna need to stand still for you to channel that glorious Drain Soul, which is such a fun mechanic, am I right? A good example here could be Garathi or Verimathras in Antorus. Wraith in Agony, increasing your Agony stacks by 5 will then be your go-to for everything else, like in fights with a lot of movements where you can see yourself making good uses out of Drain Soul, or any fight with multiple targets, like Fellhounds, Coven, and Horan High Command, and etc. On tier 2, we'll follow a similar idea, although not to such extreme. Contagion is usually your go-to once again for pure single target fights, like Malefic Grasp will increase your dot damage, this time when Unstable Affliction is up, so we'll add some more management to it. Again, more on that in a bit. But for fights with 2 or more targets can work perfectly fine if you can manage it properly on having a good uptime on Unstable Affliction on those 2 targets. More than 2, or if you don't want that hassle of constant target switching, Absolute Corruption will work as well, increasing your damage of your Corruption by 15%, plus no longer has a timer, so it will stay permanently, opening a global cooldown for you to use your other dots freely, especially great in multi-target fights with 3 or 4 targets. It can also work in single target if you really want an easy playstyle, but will be worse than Contagion. Next is optional, but the recommended here is Demonic Circle to give you some sort of mobility in the form of a teleport, so place that well to overcome the biggest weakness of the Warlock, movement. Next tier, Soul Harvest is usually best, providing a 2-minute DPS cooldown, increasing your damage by 20%. So the seeds can work nicely by making your Seed of Corruption plant on 3 targets instead of 1, giving a little more burst, but only when they are ads, so like Antorus High Command again or Portal Keeper, but Soul Harvest will work fine here as well, so pick what you prefer. Next is entirely optional as well. The go-to tends to be Burning Rush, giving you a movement speed ability at the cost of HP again, but if you feel like you don't need it, you can choose the others. Next is about your pets. Grimoire of Service provides a secondary pet in a form of a DPS cooldown, but in Affliction isn't that great as it costs a soul shard, and you want to save them for unstable afflictions, which is so much more valuable. It can also provide some degree of utility as your Fell Hunter interrupts, the Imp dispels, and the Felguard stuns. So if you're in need of that, you can take it. The go-to though is Grimoire of Supremacy, making your big pet summons that I talked about, Infernal and Doomguard, permanent. Usually gonna use Doomguard for single target, dealing more damage than your regular pets, plus provides an interrupt that you lack, and a slow. Infernal can work as a tank for out and about in the world or as an AoE pet option, so take that in mind. Grimoire of Service works if you hate having a pet, but the damage provided isn't all that great. In the last tier, either Siphon Life or Soul Conduit are pretty even in single target. Siphon Life tends to be better with gear as it gives you a new dot, while Soul Conduit will have a 20% chance to give you a soul shard when you use them. So there's a chance when you do an unstable affliction to get that soul shard back. So it's a more RNG focused choice, and Siphon Life a more stable. The best advice I can give is to test both and see what works best for you and your character or sim if possible. Death Embrace can work great, but in multi-target scenarios, essentially creates an execute-like phase for your dots, making them deal more damage at 35% HP and below on targets. So when there's console-like fights or even ads, it works great. Pure single target, it can fall flat to the other two, unless you have the talent Lego ring. As for Mythic Plus, the reasoning stays the same. In the first tier, you're generally gonna go with Malefic Grasp. Wraith in Agony can work amazingly, but it does take a while to ramp up, and in a dungeon scenario, trash packs might die too early before your Agony can do anything at those 15 stacks. Malefic Grasp can work better here. If it's a really high key with fixes like Fortified or something like that, Wraith in Agony can work nicely, so just experiment and see what works best. In the tier 2, Contagion can also work great, but depending on the dungeon. Generally with 2 or 3 targets, you get a multi-dot with Unstable Affliction. More on that later, so Contagion can work nicely here anyway. But with 3 targets and above, so in dungeons where trash packs are bigger, making multi-dotting with Unstable Affliction harder, you can just go for Absolute Corruption. Either will work, even though the permanent benefit isn't all that great for trash packs, because again, you most likely won't need to refresh corruption per trash pack, probably only once. So either will work, will just depend on the situation and how you are playing your Affliction Warlock. On the 4th tier, Phantom Singularity is really nice as a burst option for AoE, but it does have a 40-second cooldown on there, making it using on every trash pool not possible. So Seeds is usually best for Mythic Plus. Soul Harvest still works perfectly fine if you prefer it, especially if it's tyrannical. Then lastly, Death Embrace can work really nicely for trash packs, giving you a little bit more burst-ish approach to your dots, but if things don't die too quickly, so it's gonna depend on the key again. Soul Conduit can work, especially if you're playing with Contagion and multi-dotting a lot with your Unstable Afflictions. Siphon Life is probably the one that I'm least advised, as it's another dot that you're gonna have to apply to multiple targets, which you can get a little bit cluttered. Now, with that out of the way, let's talk rotation and your main gameplay. So a lot of things will change depending on the target count, so let's just start with a single target one, primarily for raid boss encounters without cooldowns, although there isn't a lot of them anyway, and then over your opener and etc. So your first priority will be on obviously keeping up all of your dots. So Agony will take the highest priority here, since it has that ramping up to 10 or 15 stacks, depending on your talents, you want to cast it first. And basically, just keep it up, refreshing it anywhere below 5 seconds. You want to avoid letting it go down so the stacks keep at max with every refresh. Then, as it ticks, it also is giving you those precious soul shards. After that comes corruption. Like agony, just keep it up, refreshing below 4 seconds or so. You don't want it to go down, although it's much more forgiving if you do. So in terms of priorities during refreshes, if both of them need, agony should always be your go-to first. That said, if you spec'd into Siphon Life, it would take priority after your agony and corruption. Like it, Siphon Life just needs to be kept up, refreshing below 4 seconds again. Just follow the refresh priorities on the screen if you want a little bit more detail. The reason why you will only want to refresh below these timers is due to the pandemic effect, which applies to every single damage over time abilities in the game, where below that time, the ticks are just gonna add on top of each other. That otherwise wouldn't happen if you refreshing too early or after it goes down. Now, the only real management and complexity, if we can call it that, will come from Unstable Affliction and Reap Souls. Unstable Affliction is your hardest hitting ability, but contrary to the others, you need soul shards to use. Plus, they last for a pretty short duration, and you can have up to 5 at the same time. So it's like a bursty type of dot. At first hand, you would use it as you get soul shards, and that will be that. However, there's contagion to keep in mind, increasing your overall dot damage while it's up. Now, you start with 3 soul shards at all times, unless you got out of a fight, or if you were lucky, you might even get 4 at this point from that first agony text. So what you're gonna do is just apply 2 Unstable Afflictions for starters. The main idea with Unstable Affliction is that you want to use them as much as you can, but also always have a backup soul shard, because you want to try and have a pretty good uptime for contagion, meaning that you want to have one active almost always throughout the fight. The only way you can get soul shards during a boss fight is through agony ticks, so it's quite random. To fight that randomness, you want to always leave that one soul shard there, so restrain yourself from using all of them at once, and only use that last one when you have no Unstable Afflictions active, or you need 2 active, but more on that in a bit, because there's also Reap Souls and Drain Soul to keep in mind. But if you're not using Contagion and are with Absolute Corruption, instead just freely use them. You don't really need to manage all that soul shards, and just need to take in mind what I'm gonna talk next. So the way Reap Souls work is that will allow you to absorb those bubble orbs that you get as you deal damage, called souls, doubling your artifact trait effects, and that means all of them. So a trait like Partition that increases your critical damage of most of your dots by 13%, when Reap Souls buff is up, it will be 26%. Fatal Echoes, where Unstable Affliction has a 6% chance to reapply itself when it depletes, will then be 12%. The damage of Soul Flame or Harvester of Souls trait will also be doubled, and etc. So what that means is that you want to have that buff active when you have your Unstable Afflictions up, preferably 2 or more. Now the problem with that is during a boss fight, getting those souls isn't all that common, so you're gonna have to manage that like your soul shards. Using with just 1 stack, so 1 soul, is never really worth, as it only lasts for 5 seconds, while Unstable Affliction lasts for 6. So if you have more than 1 on there, the buff won't live long enough to benefit them fully, neither on those flat damage increases or things like Fatal Echoes. So you only want to use them with 2 or more stacks that will last for at least 10 seconds, which will be more than enough. Plus remember that it's out of a global cooldown, so you can click on it whenever, okay? So here in the beginning, for an example, after you use 2 or more Unstable Afflictions, depending on your soul shards and talents, you're gonna use Reap Souls at 2 or more stacks. Now that said, what happens if you use 2 Unstable Afflictions, be in your opener or whenever it might be, and you only have 1 stack of Reap Souls? So what do? Do you delay Reap Souls? Do you don't use Reap Souls at all? Do you use it with 1 stack? Well, what you're gonna do is gonna skip the Rip Souls step and go to your next priority spell, which is Drain Soul. So you're gonna drain it for 1 to 2 seconds and only then use Rip Souls. So if you still add just 1 stack, it's gonna be fine because it's gonna be 5 seconds duration, and those dots are only gonna last for at least 4 to 5 seconds as well. So they will align until the end of their ticks, which is the goal in using Rip Souls and Unstable Afflictions. And also, you'd never really want to use more than 2 Unstable Afflictions. More than that is not really needed, and you want to use them smoothly throughout the fight with all of your Rip Souls, okay? Plus there's Malefic Grasp if talented, increasing all of your dot damage by 25%. So if you use Rip Souls because you could, great, all of your dots will do much more damage and you can freely do your Drain Souls to increase it even further. It's just a filler to be used when all of your dots are nicely set up, especially Unstable Afflictions, since they have a small duration and can deal a lot of damage. So you can prioritize Drain Souls during their duration. You obviously want to keep refreshing your dots, but if Unstable Afflictions are still ticking, you can leave your Corruption and Siphon's life to its last seconds. Don't let them drop, just leave it to right at the last second before you refresh, just so you can squeeze in that Malefic Grasp damage increase for those Unstable Afflictions, alright? So after that, just keep her up. Refresh your dots at the appropriate times, bank that 1 soul shard so you always have at least 1 active for contagion, but if Rip Souls buff is active or you are above 2 stacks, use that soul shard so you can have 2 Unstable Afflictions to go with it. That's the main way really to get damage with Affliction Warlock, just setting up those Unstable Afflictions with the Rip Souls buff. All the rest is just keeping up. After that initial setup, keeping Rip Souls up should be pretty easy, especially with things like Bloodlust, so it shouldn't be too much of a worry, and just manage it with your Unstable Afflictions and Soul Shards, and using Drain Souls when nothing else to do. If you're using Soul Conduit instead, not much to it, just keep track of those Soul Shards refreshes, so you can just use more Unstable Afflictions. Now, besides that, there's also the mana issue, because using all of that besides Unstable Afflictions wastes or uses mana, and you're gonna have to life tap to get it back, because Last Fantasy, I guess. So you just want to use it whenever below 30 or 40% of your mana, especially during your dying times-ish, so when Unstable Affliction isn't up or just have 1 up and you don't really have Rip Soul stacks, and you basically just refreshing your dots and stuff, that's usually the time that you want to use your life tap. Movement in general is where you can also life tap the most. So as Warlocks, movement can be a problem. Besides Demonic Circle and Demonic Gateway and your damage reduction, there's not much you can do besides draining more HP with your Burning Rush to get away from stuff, which you can do more freely as Affliction since a lot of your abilities heal you as well for a nice amount. But besides that, what you can do on a move is refresh your dots if needed, obviously, so below that 4 to 5 second timer and move in between the global cooldowns, or life tap. Even if you are at 70% mana and don't really need it, but if you need to move and nothing else can be done, just life tap at whatever mana you have unless you are like near the cap, and you are saving yourself a global cooldown in the future, alright? And that covers it, pretty much. Now, what about your opener? It's actually the same as before, really. The only cooldown that you have is Soul Harvest, which just increases your damage by 20%, and its duration is increased per Agony up. So you don't want to use it right in the beginning, but only after Agony is up for that 4-second increase timer, and your Unstable Afflictions, so they also get their damage increased. So would go Agony, Corruption, Siphon Life if you're using it, then your Unstable Afflictions too specifically, then Soul Harvest when they are up, and follow with a Rip Souls if possible straight after. You always want to combo these two whenever you can. Should be pretty easy, but take note of that. And then just follow with the same rules and idea as before with your Rip Souls, Unstable Afflictions, and all of that, okay? Now, there's other couple of things that to talk about, which is on target counts and multi-target in general. So in situations with 2 targets, your rotation is gonna stay pretty much the same. You just want to apply all of your dots to both targets and spread your Unstable Afflictions to both of them, just to try and make them have them up 100% of the time for contagion. With 3 targets follows the same idea, but can prove quite hectic, so taking Absolute Corruption can make it easier, so you no longer have to worry about corruption, so you can use Unstable Afflictions freely on all targets, or just one if there's a priority, or if you don't want to target switch, it doesn't really matter at that point since you don't have contagion, and obviously keeping up Agony. Now with ads or trash, so when targets actually die pretty quickly, other things will enter the fray. One is Wrath of Consumption Rate, increasing your dot damage by 1%, stacking 5 times, so 10% if with Rip Souls up, and Compounding Horror. Your Agony and Corruption have a chance to stack up a damage buff to make your Unstable Affliction do instant damage when applied. So when multi-targeting a lot, can be worth to use your Rip Souls before Unstable Affliction for those set buffs, so you can get more immediate damage going into them. The other is Soul Flame, but just triggers when targets die with your dots, so nothing to worry about. Plus, like I said, if there's trash or ads, as they die, they give souls for you to reap, so keeping Rip Souls buff won't be too much of an issue. The other spell to keep in mind is obviously Seed of Corruption, either simply that or with Sow the Seeds. You want to use it on 3 targets or above, especially in Mythic Plus or fights like Antorus High Command, but it also costs a Soul Shard. So the way it would go would be to first apply all of your Agonies on all targets available, then throw a single Seed of Corruption. Then, to actually make it explode, it needs to be damaged. The fastest way to do that is with Unstable Affliction, followed with a Drain Soul. So you would use that on the same target that you just applied it, and then it will explode pretty much straight away, spreading corruption on all targets. So you no longer need to multi-dot with it, saving you a lot of time. After that, you no longer really need to use Seed of Corruption unless you're not playing with Absolute Corruption and you need to refresh the dot itself. If not, instead use Unstable Affliction. It's only worth to use Seed of Corruption over Unstable Affliction if you with Sow the Seeds. Even then, Unstable Affliction will do more damage if the target count is below 3, or if the targets won't live long enough for the Unstable Affliction to damage. Alright, since Seed of Corruption just does burst immediately. Overall, in multi-targets, Agony is extremely important to multi-dot at first. Remember, it gives you soul shards, so more you have them up, more soul shards you're gonna get, so more Seed of Corruptions you can do, or Unstable Afflictions. So keep that Agony up and the Corruption, and then just spam Seed of Corruption with Sow the Seeds, or multi-dot with Unstable Affliction. All of that's depending on the target count and your talents. Remember also that Seed of Corruption needs to burst. Like I said, they should burst quickly when your Agony is at max stat, so when you send them they should explode immediately, but keep a lookout for that before using your second one, okay? Obviously, if there's multiple targets and they don't have a lot of HP, you're gonna skip the Agony step, okay? So a good example would be Dark Art Thicket and the little blobs. You don't really need to Agony that, just send a Seed of Corruption, okay? And in between all of that, you can still obviously use your Drain Soul to fill in. And speaking of which, Drain Soul sniping. Remember, if a target dies while channeling, gives a soul shard. So with ads or trash packs, remember to use it as they are about to die, so you get more of them, easily forgettable at max level. And last spell I forgot to mention is Phantom Singularity, but just use it as you get it, after setting up your Agonies and before Unstable Afflictions or Seed of Corruption, depending on your situation, and it will just stay there dealing damage. As for pets, remember to use Doomguard for single target, but Infernal for dungeons or Antorus High Command like fights, as it deals AoE damage. Just remove the taunt ability and let it do its thing. And that covers it. As for stats, and then to wrap up, so stats in Affliction are all actually pretty good to you, and it's just gonna depend on your current gear setup, like Legos, current stats, trinkets and whatnot. So it's not uncommon for you to see high-end Affliction Warlocks using things like Prydas or the Crucible Ring just to get those juicy stats. For the most part, Mastery is amazing as it increases your dot damage, but so is Haste because it lowers your global cooldowns and increases how fast your dots tick. So more damage because you can click faster and they tick faster, and more soul shards. Crit is also great, especially due to the partition traits that I talked about, stacking pretty well with it. And versatility is also great, just for overall more damage. Hell, even the healing it increases can be good. Intellect overall is going to be worst, I can tell you that for sure, but to know exactly what are going to be your stat weights is just going to be through sims. Most stats can be even and rarely you get the super best stat, so do try to get a little bit of everything, but sim if you can. As for legendaries, the hood is usually amazing as it makes the ramping up of agony 10% faster, but so can be the waste for that unstable affliction refund. Those two usually dominate the single target space, and the waste the multi-target space, but like I said, Pridus can be great as well. For multi-target stays pretty much the same, but the talent rank can prove to be pretty amazing also for you to get Death Embrace for free. As for your tier 21 is pretty good, but nothing to worry about. Overall, Affliction is really not my style. Just applying dots and refreshing them and be a Drain Soul turret is in my opinion not the definition of fun. Thankfully, there seems to be some nice changes in BFI, especially Nightfall, but I mean the hashtag no alpha club. So yeah, so guys, that covers it all. As always, thank you for watching, like and subscribe for more videos like this. Have a fantastic day everyone, and I'll see you all next time. See ya!